Hello and welcome to Leadership Lanes. Today we'll be talking about overcoming technology challenges in retail, and we have Jeff Corman with us. Jeff has over 40 years of retail experience, primarily with three major chains, Meijer, Kohl's department stores, and Walmart. He has worked primarily in store operations his entire career, either running stores, overseeing stores, and supporting stores from a corporate office. He has experience in process improvements, tech implementation, and strategic planning, which is the core of our discussion today. And he's now working as an advisor to retailers. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Great. So let's start with the opening question, right? I mean, there's no doubt that technology has transformed retail, but why does it still remain such a challenge to implement it successfully?
I think my my point of view and what I've seen over my career is that a lot of time companies want to implement technology, but not necessarily make it part of the process. So they basically find this new type of technology that they think is going to be fantastic to help efficiency, improve a customer service, et cetera, and they implement it, but they really don't restructure the process. They don't maybe redefine the roles and responsibilities of the employees. And so a lot of times employees won't adopt it because they just don't see how it fits their what they do every day in their job. So I'm an advocate that you start with the process, you define roles and responsibilities, and then you implement technologies to support that process. And I think a lot of times the companies, like I said, they get so excited about seeing these new tech, especially the new one being a lot of AI, fantastic opportunities to help efficiencies, et cetera. But if you don't make it part of the process, most employees are going to take the path of least resistance, and they won't necessarily adopt it. So that's what I've seen over my career.
Got it, got it. I'll move to the first segment, which essentially talks about common hurdles, right? Some of which you actually summarized very perfectly in the opening question, starting with, as I say, the elephant in the room, right? Legacy systems. Um, how do legacy systems hold retailers back? And why is modernization so daunting in that case, right? We all know legacy systems are not going anywhere, right? They're there for years. It will take probably years for them to even pivot for that matter.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. In fact, at Walmart, we were living that pretty significantly. And there had been a couple of CTOs that came in and all had ambition to, take care of some of these legacy systems, move more to the cloud, whatever. And to your point, get so wrapped up in implementation of other type of technology that they just can't make that work. So you get this huge tech debt that you now have that's eating most of your tech budget, and it continues to compound on itself year on year, and therefore it puts a lot of pressure on not only making sure that you eventually get off those legacy systems, but do the implementation of the current or the most newer systems to keep you relevant in the industry. So I've always looked at it as three different categories. One is legacy system. That's the one that's foundational. A lot of retailers have been built their systems like the warehouse management system or the pricing system or the POS system, and they've been around forever since the start of the company. And because they are so entwined, you basically have just made band-aid improvements on it versus in some cases saying, hey, we're going to get off it totally, move to another system. And it's a big commitment for budget wise, both, like I said, from a tech debt, but equally the implementation side of new systems. The second one is what I would say more of the process improvement or enhancements, which is going to be systems that have a strong ROI, easy to build a business case against. And they're the ones that typically take over a lot of the pressure of that extra budget dollars, because it's real hard to say, if I spend $1 and I get 5 back, who's not going to do that, especially as a CFO? And then you got the third category, which is what I would say is kind of nice to haves. Probably doesn't have a good business case or ROI, but in many cases is needed to improve associate relations or customer relations, and things like that. So whether that's um, maybe from an employee perspective, I can look at my paycheck online or on an app, or I get communicated to through apps, things like that. there's really not an ROI to that. Some people say you can reduce turnover, but for the most part, it's not an ROI product. But you have to have so many dollars set up to that. So as you break down those dollars in terms of the base of the foundational, the business case, enhancement, and then ultimately the nice to haves, it eats up the budget very quickly. So it's a very long strategic play to get off it. And like I said, Walmart was heavily in this process back when I was working there, and they actually got to see TO now or CIO that it absolutely is making a difference in moving things to the cloud, which ultimately is going to make more efficient as you go forward with new enhancements.
It's interesting, right? You mentioned tech debt. One question I have surrounding tech debt is how does leadership look at something like tech debt?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to from a leadership perspective,
Yeah.
right? So
I'll
if it's
say remove the CTO out of the picture here, and I would say anyone who's not a CTO, how do they look at something like a technical debt? Because it is kind of a major, I would say, component in a life cycle, in the development life cycle of a product. So yeah.
yeah, I think every business within a retailer has their version of tech debt. And so to answer your question directly, I think most of like if it's a chief merchandising officer or the head of logistics or the head of stores, they're all going to look at that tech debt as just it's a necessary evil, or it doesn't benefit them, so they really don't care. That's on you, CTO. You take care of your problems. It's no different than in the store operations side, where if the store is run down and needs a lot of maintenance, the CTO is not looking at that. They're looking at how well is the store employees executing against the strategy. So everybody has their version of tech debt, I think, in the business, but directly, I think most of the leadership teams don't look at it as they're it's more of a hurdle for them, and it's something that you just need to go deal with versus prevent me from getting the things I think I need to be successful in my job, such as maybe a whole brand new scheduling system if I'm talking about stores, or a whole brand new item location system that allows stores to be more effective in finding merchandise. Those are the types of things that I'm interested in. Everything being in green screens or non-cloud based or whatever, that's your problem, and I think that's how they kind of think about it.
That's interesting, actually, and that's and something related to this itself, right? I wouldn't say tightly, but loosely related to this is integration, right? Integration between systems, whether it is legacy, whether it is cloud, whether it is legacy versus modern, and even I would go one step further and talk about data integration for that matter. Retailers have so much data, right? I mean, I believe it's one of the industries that generates tons and tons of data on a per second or a millisecond basis. So why is connecting data, right, such a hurdle, especially when we have APIs, when we have the new protocols built day in, day out? Why is it becoming such a hurdle? Is it more of a tech issue or is it more of a non-tech issue, if I had to be much more clear?
Yeah, and to your point of that, I mean, Walmart has more data than anybody outside of the U.S. government, and so how do you take all that data and best utilize it to your advantage, I think, is the secret sauce. And what I would say from my tenure there is that I think that there's certain things that obviously the retailer is absolutely interested in looking at, like sales, profits or whatever. But when it gets down to the nitty gritty of what that data provides, it's really kind of two or three different hurdles, if you would. Number one is, what are we truly measuring that we feel has an impact on our business? And again, if you look at the high level P&L, you got sales, margin, profit, expenses, whatever, SG&A. Those are the kind of like your dashboard on your car. Those are your gas gauge, your speedometer, tachometer. It's really the metrics underneath that start to drive the decision making, as well as identifying where the opportunities lie. And that's kind of like when your engine light comes on and you plug in your code reader, your car, it starts bringing back these codes of things that are going on. That's where I think it starts getting a little bit difficult to understand what truly metric is going to make a difference. I think a lot of people have a hard time processing too many metrics, too much data. just themselves as to what they're looking at to be able to make a decision, and what may be important to you is different than me, and therefore it just creates that ants. And then I think the other part of it is just how do you, once you decide all that, which is very difficult, how then do you take just loads and loads of data and filter it in a way that brings back those answers in a way that's actionable, is what I see as to be some of the challenge. And I think if anything's going to help, I think AI is destined to make the difference here, right? And I think as you look at all the AI opportunities, they all are talking about how you ask a question and it's going to bring back an answer using lots of data points that before you may not be able to get quickly or reconcile it quickly. Now with AI, that's taken it what might have taken you an hour, two, a week to come back in seconds. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes. But to me, the bottom line foundation, it doesn't matter what AI brings back. It doesn't matter what the data is. It really comes down to what you want to measure and that you feel actually is going to make an impact on your metrics. And then get everybody aligned to that so you don't have people going in 20 different directions with data they think or information they think is better than what you're providing.
You sum it perfectly right. And I believe two main concerns, I would say, or two main aspects that you spoke about. One is the fact of having too many metrics, and the other one is you don't have to scramble to 20 different places to get the metric or to get the data that you want. Do you feel that there is always a disconnect between technology, and when I say technology, I mean IT and data both? There is a disconnect between technology and business when it comes to how the data needs to be curated, how much data needs to be curated, because there is always a race. That's what I feel, and I believe that there's always a race between the data engineers or the data teams to get as much metrics, as much reports as possible, but most of them are not even consumed, and most of them don't even make sense.
Yeah, I think that really stems on what we just talked about, in that it really comes down to the person that is trying to make those decisions and what they truly want. And I think either, like I said, a couple of things can happen. Either I think that getting these metrics that are well below sales margin, et cetera, are the metrics I need to get basically the pulse of the business. Am I right or am I wrong? It's my point of view. Your point of data, your scientists and engineers, they are out there to try to map that data to give me what I want. They tend to not have the background, and nor should they. I mean, that's not their role to have the background of what type of data needs to be looked at in terms of bringing it back good decision, uh, you know, enhancements, if you will. So that's one. And then I think the second part of that is, even though you may find that I kind of know the data I want and I'm asking for it, I still have 20 other people, and it could be 20, it could be 50, it could be one extra person that's asking for data on top of that may not match the data that I have. So now you've got two people, whether that might be as high as the chief merchandising officer, the chief CEO of stores, asking for data that might be contradictory to each other to try to make the same decision. So, and unfortunately, I think the tech group is at the mercy of that. They're just trying to bring back that data to support what their ask is, and the ask might not be right. And I think, to me, that's the biggest challenge. Is there's so much information out there. How do you align to what you really need to be looking at, from the CEO all the way down to the frontline worker, to ensure that we're making the right decisions with that information? And that is the hardest part. I think getting the data, filtering it appropriately, using AI or whatever to bring it back faster and help sort through it is actually the easy part. The hard part is getting people to be aligned to what they're looking at, and how we're all going to look at the same thing. I just remember an example at Walmart. We came up with a dashboard of all the key metrics that corporately we wanted the stores to look at. And so if I was a store manager, I plug in my information and it would bring back the information I need for my given store that we felt that they needed. The market manager, the person that sits above the store, they had their version of that dashboard, same data in terms of where that data resides. Uh, everything was built infrastructurally to support it. So if I looked at sales at the store, no matter what level, that's the same number. You didn't have that two or three different numbers for the same store, but that market manager had the same information, and they could go in and look at that information. We found happened is those market managers would do that. Then they would turn over to their administrative assistant and say, I want you to pull all this information, put it into a spreadsheet, and then refilter it this way and bring it to me that way. So all of a sudden you had 600 or market managers taking the information and moving it around or making it look differently than what we send it down to look like, which was just a big waste of time. But the point of it is that they wanted to see it their way, and it may not have been the right way to look at it. It's just the way that they wanted to look at it. So I think, to me, those are the bigger challenges you have, uh, even on more than finding the data and filtering it back to the way people want. Is really what should they be looking at, and are they willing to stick to that?
That's interesting. You feel with AI that is becoming less of a challenge?
To be totally truthful, I haven't been engaged with the AI like I would have been back when I was working at Walmart. But here's what I think. I think, and I might be a little naive with this answer, so I apologize, but I feel like AI is a great way to bring back information very quickly by using multiple data points. And it
Hmm.
learns over time the way I'm asking questions to bring it back in the way that's going to be most relevant to me. And I think that's fantastic, because obviously part of the tech challenge today is, sometimes finding the data, bringing it back and filtering it could take weeks or, whatever, whereas AI is allowing that to happen much quicker. But the problem is it still comes back to it's trying to give me the information in a way that I'm asking for it, and the way that I might be asking for it is not necessarily the best way. So it's basically bringing back the information to me much quicker, but it may not be in a very productive way just because of the way I think about it. Or it might be contradictory in a sense to the market manager, the store manager, or the whatever level you want to talk to one of my peers. The way I ask the question could be different the way you ask the question, and all of a sudden you get two different numbers and et cetera. So I think it's fantastic. It's going to be revolutionary to not only retail but all kinds of industries. But when it comes to truly knowing what to ask and truly making sure you ask the question and then living by that, is still kind of the human side of it that I think AI is going to not fulfill, if you will.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. We'll move to the next segment here. And since we were talking about legacy systems, data challenges, now we are talking more about new technology implementation, right? Starting with how can retailers manage risk by starting small with new technologies?
Well, like I said at the beginning, to me, technology is an enhancement to the way we want people to work. And obviously, it's huge, huge. We absolutely need it. And, but it really comes down to me is how do you want people to work, whether that's in a store, a distribution center, or even in an office? And then what roles do you need that to supplement that process? And then the technology comes in to say, okay, where can we use technology to either be foundational or enable or improve the efficiency of that process? And once if you start from scratch, it's one thing. Most retailers obviously are not starting from scratch; they're starting from a way that they've been doing it forever. So by process mapping that out, identifying the steps that could be removed, like I always used to say, never be good at something you shouldn't be doing at all. So the first thing you want to look for is the things that are just unnecessary steps. Take that out, eliminate it, and then you can look at, say, the second thing would be, is there a process or something we can do to make that step easier, whether that's providing a cart or some sort of some other type of tool that may not be technology. And then the third part is, how then do you use something to help you make these steps be more efficient? And I think that's where the technology comes in. So back to what I said earlier, many, I say retailers, but it's probably even broader than retail, tend to want to skip 1 and 2 and go right to 3. And because of that, it makes it difficult. So I think to answer your question directly, I think you have to have a very strong process of improvement, if you will, whether that's a Six Sigma or whatever you use. They're all good. It just you have to be disciplined to use it, and then part of that is the testing process. And I know when we worked at Walmart, we were really starting to get more involved in product versus just, using a product versus the old waterfall way of thinking, I guess. And then part of that has been, what Facebook, or now is Meta, obviously, uh, really taught a lot of us was, fail fast. So do a lot of small tests, fail fast, learn from it, and don't be afraid to just throw it out and come up with a whole new idea. The faster you can make those decisions, the quicker you will be to get to the right answer. So start out with this good process improvement uh, way of working, and then utilize I guess, a fail fast type mentality. And then how do you then implement and roll out or integrate and all that, then, starts becoming the third phase of that.
The next question here was mainly from, I would say, an ROI perspective, specifically from a tech investments point of view. The first question there is, how can retailers align tech investments with business goals, or how effectively they can align? Because most of the times we have noticed that there are a lot of initiatives going on which typically do not tie to the OKR or the epic that typically is defined at a leadership level. So what how do you feel it's much more effectively managed by retailers?
I can tell you that what we did, I think, back in the day is a real effective way of aligning that. And so, in my mind, again, this is store operations uh, centric, if you will. We had engineered standards for everything that we did. And so whenever we asked a store to unload a truck, to ring up a register, whatever process of work that they did, we had engineered standards for step to step, what it cost us. And we used that for a lot of things. We used it for budgetary purposes to make sure the stores had the amount of labor that it needed to do the work. We used that to help influence other business areas, whether that's logistics or merchandising, excuse me, to maybe change the way that they work so that it can be more effective in the store and have better outcomes. But in spirit of what you're talking about, what we ultimately would do is use it as a 3 to 5 year strategy. And so we would work with the CFO to determine where does the organization, specifically in this case the stores, but they have the same thought process across all the businesses, but where do they need to be 3 5 years from now in order to continue the growth, the profitability growth, the revenue growth, that the board of directors and the CEO and everybody wants. So then once you identify that number, then you can start taking a look at where are we today versus where we need to be. And then you start utilizing that information to try to figure out a way year on year to get to that. And what you're ultimately trying to do is to get to that final destination, which in most cases, especially in a public company, that number is going to be a lot lower as a per hour, if you will, or however you want to measure, than it is today. So just naturally, if you want to continue to grow profits, something's going to have to grow. And obviously, the more you grow sales, the easier it is. But if you're chasing sales and having to reduce your cost to improve your profit, that's really a difficult thing. So the longer you have to understand what that needs to be, the better. Once you take that information and say, what is that gap by year, then you can start using that information to start making good, sound business decisions. And what we would do is we'd use it to help us identify what technologies are going to make more sense and how does that help our business case to support the technology. And then knowing what that is 3 to 5 years out, sitting down with the tech groups and letting them know where we are today, where we need to be, and our vision as to how we're going to get there from a tech perspective was a huge success. So when you got to the situation, and I use our self checkouts as an example at Walmart, we were saying, hey, we need to get from point A to point B. And this checkout experience at Walmart and a lot of retailers is the worst thing that customers hate going through the checkout. No matter how pleasant the experience it is, they just don't see the value in it, right? And so A, customer experience is no good. B, you have to have the associate or employee one-to-one relationship with a customer. That's very inefficient. So for every customer, you have an employee that is they're checking out. So that creates a chokehold, if you will. And then, from a cost of it, the front end was the number two cost in labor in the entire store. So there's just a lot of reasons why you want to look at that. So what we would then say is if we could increase the utilization of our self-checkouts and implement more self-checkouts and build our process to support it from a customer and employee perspective, not only will that reduce our costs to align to where we need to go, but then we can start working on efficiencies of the software and things we can do to improve all that as well. Once you sat down with the tech group and say, we need to buy more self-checkouts, we need to do it in a more effective way, or we need to continually improve the experience from a software perspective, from both the customer and the employee, so that we can ultimately achieve this X amount of dollars savings, it's crystal clear as to where, and it gets everybody aligned. And then the thing is when you get in those situations then where you start getting off a line, it's real easy to pull everybody back in, because it's like, okay, if we need to hit these dollars, here's what we got. And so unless you can come up with a different solution that we can take to the bank, if you will, this is the technology strategy that we have, and from a business perspective, which then the tech group can certainly have their point of view on that, and maybe even make the process or the ID even better because of their experience in seeing specific vendors or et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's the best way to get people aligned, including the CFO, the logistics group, et cetera. We would share that information across the entire organization so that everybody knows, why is operations putting in more self checkouts? Well, they're doing it to help engage on those 3 or 4 things I mentioned.
Got it. That's an interesting approach, actually, right? Moving on to the last question here, right? Again, tying back to the legacy bit that we discussed earlier, how do we ensure, or how do retailers ensure that today's tech investments don't become tomorrow's legacy?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, probably
It's
a whole episode for this, but yeah.
Yeah, it is a big question, but I think it really comes down to having a good strategic planning process, and obviously having the talent around that process to ensure that the decisions are being made. There's obviously, the SIPO, the 80% and 20%. 80% of it is database, 20% of it might be gut. And whoever you have as leader with their experiences, their gut, good. But it all does come down to, do we have the right strategic approach from a planning perspective? Do we have the right processes to help support that? And then do we look at technology in a way that is long-term exponentially important for our organization, which I think more and more companies obviously do. And it's having the knack to be able to look at technology and not get chasing the shiny object, right? There's so many shiny objects when it comes to technology. That's where you have to follow your foundational gut that aligns to the business strategies, and really trust in the tech teams to come up with the way to be the most effective, efficient way. And the way technology continues to improve, that's actually getting easier. But that, like you said, that could be a whole episode in itself. But to me, it's just foundationally comes back to strong strategic planning and having the right talent around that process to ensure that they don't chase the wrong shiny objects.
Perfect. It was great talking to you, Jeff. Thanks a lot for coming onto the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, and thanks for everything.